Today we have an election prediction between Senator Joe Manchin from the state of West Virginia and President Donald Trump. So I've done this a couple times before, but this electoral map should be a little bit different now that we know a little bit more about Joe Manchin and also his approval in West Virginia. So we're looking at this map. I did do the Claire McCaskill versus Donald Trump video using the shaded region. I am not using that now. It did not look pretty. But I'll probably just explain it briefly over each state. So we're going to start off with the Trump states, typically, since we don't start off with those states. Pretty much he's going to win the same exact states that he won in 16, around the same amount. Why is Georgia not going? Okay, we have Illinois, of course, going to the Democrats. Nevada, nope, that's not one just yet. Maybe going to Trump. We'll see. Virginia, obviously. Actually, West Virginia, I don't know why I filled that one in right now. Virginia goes to Joe Manchin for obvious reasons. A typical Democrat will win there anyway, regardless, even though Joe Manchin is from West Virginia, which should definitely help him in that state. We're looking at this map. We see 200 electoral votes for Joe Manchin. Sorry, now 201, and 160 for Donald Trump. So we look at this map, 177 contested electoral votes. A newcomer to the Too Close to Call column, West Virginia. Say hi to West Virginia, everybody. But we're looking at this map. Again, typical map. We see the same map every 2020 election prediction, mainly because a number of these races aren't going to flip. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota. These states aren't going blue for a while. Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, not going blue. Washington, Oregon, California, these states are not going red. Up in the Northeast, not going red. So that's why a lot of these videos start out the same. I've seen a couple comments saying, why are all the videos the same? Ask the American electorate, not me. We're looking, again, for areas for a Trump victory because right now he is behind Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin, I don't see carrying Georgia or Arizona. I do think that he could definitely bring the margins in a bit closer, which is why this shaded map would look better when it comes down to those states. But overall, looking at this map, that's not something you would see on the news media, and it wouldn't just look, it wouldn't look pretty, to say the least. But right now, Georgia and Arizona, I do see a narrow Trump victory, but I think that Georgia could get a little bit closer. But Arizona, I still see landing in the Trump column, which is pretty interesting, considering that Arizona voted less for Trump than Georgia in 2016. But it's mainly because Joe Manchin is from West Virginia and could better appeal to the South than in the Sun Belt. 187 electoral votes for Donald Trump. Right now, we go up to the Northeast. I see a narrow victory for Joe Manchin in the Northeast from the state of New Hampshire. And the only reasoning behind that is I think Joe Manchin could bring over a couple more Republican voters. Hillary Clinton won here by 2,000 votes. I did not give Claire McCaskill the victory in New Hampshire. She really isn't that much of a conservative Democrat. Just she is a Democrat from a conservative state, and she also votes a little bit more lenient to the Republican side because she has to, just for her reelection bid. So she may come off as a conservative Democrat, whereas Joe Manchin really is a conservative Democrat. And I think he could definitely bring over a little bit more of independent voters. I don't necessarily think that New Hampshire voters are going to have a backlash against a conservative Democrat as the nominee. They definitely had a backlash against Hillary Clinton becoming the nominee if you looked at the margin in New Hampshire in the Democratic primary compared to the 2016 election result. They definitely did not like Hillary Clinton, but we could probably see the same amount of voters coming out for Manchin as they did Clinton, and also Manchin gaining a couple Republican and independent voters, which would narrowly put him over the top up there. And I see the same thing happening in Maine at large. I just see a narrow victory for Joe Manchin, but of course, it looks safe for right now. 207 electoral votes for Senator Manchin, 187 for President Trump. So I've been avoiding West Virginia, and I'm probably going to continue to do that because that one is pretty close. But Pennsylvania and Michigan, I see going to Joe Manchin, and that's a pretty interesting call, considering that right now, it doesn't seem like the Democrats are doing too well in these states. But right now, Michigan, Donald Trump is not very highly approved of. Pennsylvania, neither there. I mean, around the three states in the Rust Belt, it's around the same. Just Michigan is right now the lowest. And Pennsylvania, Donald Trump won by 44,000 votes. I think Joe Manchin, coming from a state like West Virginia, definitely could appeal to voters in Pennsylvania much better than the president could. Hillary Clinton really couldn't, and it mainly because, number one, she's flip-flopped on a number of issues that directly impact Pennsylvania, West Virginia, pretty much Rust Belt voters, and it really didn't help her. But also the Democratic Party had party fatigue. That's not something that's going to kick in now, considering that Trump was able to break this blue wall for the first time in 2 decades, around 28, 24 years, depending on the state you're looking at. Minnesota, if the rest of the Rust Belt's going, Minnesota is also going to the Manchin column. When we're looking at this map, Joe Manchin's approval rating from the last time I made a prediction has dropped below 50%. Before, it was in the low 60s or high 60s, and now it's around 42%. So right now, I see a narrow victory for Donald Trump in West Virginia. which is pretty interesting, but still the map would look around the same considering that West Virginia is going red. But there is a great possibility Joe Manchin could win there, being a conservative Democrat, and typically West Virginia isn't as partisan in a presidential election year. Pretty much 2016 was a major backlash against Hillary Clinton, but right now I see a Trump victory just based off Joe Manchin's approval rating and how he's being perceived by a number of people in the electorate, but also he's probably going to win the Senate race here, which is also something that's pretty interesting. But Colorado I see going to Joe Manchin right now. Colorado retaining its Democratic identity, but North Carolina and Florida I narrowly see going to the Trump column, and that's something that should also be pretty interesting because North Carolina, Joe Manchin would definitely be able to appeal to North Carolina voters a little bit more, but with those Republican voters coming over, this state is still a leaning Republican state. I see a narrow victory for the Trump campaign here, not as much as in 2016, but still a victory nonetheless. And down in Florida, I really don't see Joe Manchin targeting a state like Florida. He probably wouldn't need it if he was going to win, considering that a lot of the Democrats are hoping for a Bill Nelson victory in the Senate race there, which may not come true because of someone like Rick Scott. And also the Democratic Party isn't able to appeal to Florida voters like they used to be able to. And also, Donald Trump's approval rating is pretty high in Florida. It's the highest out of all the swing states. He won in 2016, so keep that in mind. Florida right now isn't hating on Donald Trump like some of these other states are. And if you look at those polls, I mean, a simple Google search will tell you that his approval rating is pretty high in Florida compared to those other states. But also, it's not something to be flaunted by the Trump campaign. It's still not 60% or 70%. It's somewhere around, I believe, the low 50s or high 40s. So that puts Trump at 236 electoral votes. Nevada, I see going to Trump. I do not see Joe Manchin being able to appeal to those Latino voters and bringing them out to vote against someone like Donald Trump. And also, his approval rating is pretty good for someone who lost there in 2016. Ohio, that one I narrowly see going in the Trump column. I think that his margin in 2016, along with Iowa, puts him narrowly the victor over the top in that state. Not pretty much over 50%, but those third-party voters will definitely make an impact. But right now, I see a narrow victory for Donald Trump in both of these states. But Wisconsin, I see narrowly going to Joe Manchin. And the reason why I've said narrowly so many times is because a lot of these states are going to be very close. We have pretty much someone like Donald Trump on the Democratic side and then a Donald Trump. So these races definitely would get close, but also people voting down partisan lines would also make an impact on these videos, on this, I guess, election predictions in these type of videos. We always have to factor in that partisan type voter, regardless of the candidate, they're always going to vote one way. States like Wyoming and Idaho are never going to go to the Democratic candidate, regardless of who they are. But swing states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania could flip-flop depending on the candidates, as they did in 2016, 2012, 2008, 2004, pretty much every election in modern political history. So we finish off our map with Senator Manchin at 272 electoral votes and Donald Trump at 266. Thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.